22C? She's probably a charity case the airline let on to look generous, a businessman sneered, his words sharp enough for the whole cabin to hear. Laughter rippled as an influencer streamed her humiliation, passengers smirking at the woman in the faded hoodie and worn sneakers. But Alina didn't flinch. Her hand brushed the metal tag in her tote, her gaze steady, as if waiting for the sky to answer. Just when the cabin's ridicule reached its peak, the air outside split with a roar. Two fighter jets locked onto the plane. Alina whispered, calm and certain, "They're here for me." Moments later, the radio crackled alive. "Shadow Viper 22, welcome back." And then Air Force One appeared, saluting the forgotten legend the world thought was gone forever. The cabin hummed with the usual chorus of air travel, the whir of the engines, the low buzz of conversation, the occasional clink of ice in glasses as flight attendants wheeled carts through the aisle. In the middle of economy class, pressed against the cold window in seat 22C, sat Alina Cross. At 30, she looked far younger than her years in some ways, older in others. Her dark hair was tied into a careless bun, strands falling free around her face. She wore a gray hoodie that had seen better days, jeans that carried the memory of years of wear, and sneakers with scuffed rubber and fraying laces. In her lap rested a plain tote bag, clutched lightly as though it were the only anchor she needed. Most passengers gave her a glance and moved on, but some stares lingered longer, sharpened by judgment. To her left across the aisle, Victor Hale, a Wall Street veteran with the smug assurance of money and status, leaned back in his seat. His suit was too crisp for a flight, his watch deliberately tilted so the light caught it every time he raised his hand. Victor thrived on performance, and Alina, slouched in her corner, silent, faceless, was the perfect target. "Unbelievable," Victor muttered, his voice deliberately loud enough for those around him to hear. "Airlines must be desperate. Look at 22C. Doesn't even look like she belongs here." Beside him, his younger colleague, Darren Price, smirked. Darren was the classic finance bro. Hair slicked back, cufflinks polished to a shine, his grin designed to mirror Victor's approval. He tilted his head toward Alina, studying her hoodie and worn shoes. She probably spent her last dime on that seat. Can't imagine what she's doing in this section. 2 rows ahead, Kara Summers, early 20s, glossy hair, phone practically glued to her hand, saw an opportunity. She angled her camera toward Alina, whispering into her live stream. "Guys, look at this. Seat 22C. Total bargain bin vibes. I mean, who shows up to a flight dressed like that?" Hearts and laughing emojis cascaded across her screen as her followers poured in their approval. The cabin soon filled with chuckles, some amused, some simply eager to join in the mockery. The laughter rippled to where Claudia Mercer sat, her navy dress perfectly pressed, her posture straight as if she were in a boardroom rather than on a flight. Claudia leaned toward her colleague and said, just loud enough to carry, "I bet she's one of those charity cases they let on for PR. It's almost offensive sitting here with us." She flipped her hair back, earrings glinting under the cabin lights. Her voice dipped in disdain. Further down the row, Ellen and Richard Drake, a couple in their 60s draped in designer clothing, whispered with the confidence of people who never had to explain themselves. Ellen's diamond bracelet glittered with each gesture as she murmured, "She really doesn't belong here." Richard, scrolling on his phone, barely looked up before adding, "Probably boarded the wrong flight." Their shared chuckle dripped with superiority. And then there was Jason Cole, the flight attendant, tall, efficient, with the kind of posture that suggested discipline, but not kindness. As he passed Alina's seat, he set a plastic cup of water on her tray harder than necessary. The sound made her fingers twitch, but she didn't open her eyes. Jason's glare lingered for a second longer than it needed to, as if to remind her she was an inconvenience. Through it all, Alina remained still, her breathing even, her face unreadable, her fingers lightly brushing the strap of her tote. To the others, she looked like someone trying to disappear, a shadow shrinking under their laughter. But if anyone had looked closely, they would have noticed her stillness wasn't the stillness of fear. It was the stillness of someone used to being underestimated. This scene is more than simple cruelty. It's a mirror of society. In a world obsessed with wealth, image, and online validation, Someone like Alina Cross becomes invisible until she's an easy target. The businessman flaunts his money, the influencer hunts for clicks, the consultant sneers at imperfection, the wealthy couple measure worth in diamonds, and even the flight attendant uses authority to belittle. But invisibility can be deceiving. What they saw as weakness was quiet strength. What they mocked as poverty was armor. History is filled with legends who once looked like nobodies. Alina Cross, silent in 22C, carried more than a faded hoodie. She carried a past that would prove greatness never needs permission to shine. The laughter didn't fade. It spread like wildfire. What began as a few whispered jokes soon became the cabin's shared entertainment. Every shift of a camera, every cruel smirk, piled on to remind Alina Cross that in the eyes of these strangers, she was nothing more than a spectacle. Kara Summers, ever hungry for attention, leaned into her phone with the kind of energy reserved for viral moments. "You guys won't believe this," she said in a hushed but excited voice. The camera framed Alina in her faded hoodie, slouched against the window, clutching her tote. Seat 22C, like, does she even know where she is? This isn't a bus ride, sweetie. Her live chat exploded with laughing emojis, fire icons, and cruel remarks from followers who knew nothing of Alina, but saw her as easy prey. Kara's eyes lit up at the engagement. This was gold for her brand. Alina didn't turn her head. Her eyes stayed on the clouds beyond the glass, fingers tracing slow patterns on the canvas strap of her bag. But her stillness only emboldened the crowd. To them, her silence was surrender. 2 rows ahead, Claudia Mercer folded her arms, her voice carrying that professional sharpness she used to dominate boardrooms. Pathetic, really. People like her drag everything down. No ambition, no polish, no self-respect. It's almost insulting to share space with it. She didn't even call Alina her. She reduced her to it, as though stripping her of humanity gave weight to her superiority. Her colleague chuckled, nodding as though Claudia had scored a clever point in a debate rather than cut into a stranger's dignity. The whispers became bolder. A group of college-aged men in the back angled their phones toward Alina, narrating their own running commentary. "Crazy lady in 22C, check it out," one of them laughed, his voice echoing across the cabin. His friends erupted into howls, hands shaking as they tried to capture shaky videos. They weren't laughing at something funny. They were laughing at the permission to degrade someone without consequence. Jason Cole, the flight attendant, returned to the aisle with clipped efficiency. He stopped at Alina's row, eyes narrowing slightly, as if she'd broken some invisible rule of order. "Ma'am, please stay quiet and avoid disturbing the other passengers," he said, his tone flat but laced with irritation. He hadn't given her the benefit of innocence. He had already judged her guilty of being a nuisance simply for existing outside their expectations. With a sharp movement, he adjusted her tray table without asking, as if reclaiming control. A few passengers smirked at the gesture, interpreting it as the airline putting her back in her place. Through it all, Alina remained a portrait of composure. The corners of her mouth didn't twitch. Her eyes didn't harden. Her fingers, however, betrayed her. Subtle movements against the fabric of her tote, tapping like a rhythm only she knew. To anyone watching closely, it was a sign. She was holding something in, not because she was powerless, but because she was waiting. Yet to the cabin, her restraint became fuel. Laughter rose again, murmurs swelling like an orchestra of disdain. They mistook her silence for weakness, her calm for fragility. Silence is often misunderstood. Society equates loudness with strength and quick words with power, so those who stay quiet are seen as weak. But silence can also be armor, a choice, even a strategy. Alina's stillness in seat 22C was misread by everyone. To Kara, it meant easy content. To Claudia, proof of superiority. To Jason, compliance. To the frat boys, comedy. To the wealthy couple, confirmation she didn't belong. What none of them realized was that silence can carry more weight than words. For Alina, it was dignity, patience, and the quiet strength of someone who had faced storms far greater than their ridicule. They mocked her to protect their own fragile pride, never seeing that 22C was not emptiness, but the calm before revelation. The cabin had settled into a cruel rhythm of laughter and whispers when the overhead speaker crackled to life. The easy hum of engines seemed to sharpen as Captain Michael Reeves's voice came through, measured but edged with something that instantly pulled the air tight. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've just received an unidentified warning signal. Please remain calm and seated. For a heartbeat, silence fell, the kind of silence that feels unnatural, fragile, as though the whole cabin held its breath together. And then, chaos. Passengers twisted in their seats, pressing faces against narrow windows. Phones appeared in every hand, screens raised to record clouds as if pixels could offer answers. Somewhere near the back, a man in a polo shirt shouted, "Is it terrorists?" His voice cracked, but the word landed like a spark in dry grass. Panic spread in an instant. Victor Hale gripped his armrest, muttering about lawsuits, already composing his outrage in the language of legal threats. Kara Summers gasped theatrically into her phone. "Guys, something is happening. We might be under attack." Hearts and shocked emojis exploded on her live stream. Claudia Mercer pulled her jacket tight, whispering to her colleague, "This airline's incompetence is unbelievable." Meanwhile, Ellen and Richard Drake clutched each other's hands, Ellen's diamond bracelet clinking as she hissed, "We should have taken the jet." In the midst of the noise, Alina Cross slowly opened her eyes. They were dark, steady, eyes that had seen worse storms than this. She leaned forward slightly, her hand brushing the hidden tag inside her tote, and whispered words that carried farther than she intended. "They're here for me." Her voice was calm, certain. For a second, confusion silenced those closest to her. Then came the eruption of laughter. Victor barked out a harsh chuckle. "You? Please." Darren smirked, shaking his head. "Top Gun wannabe." Kara tilted her camera toward Alina, grinning wide. "Oh my God, you guys! She thinks the jets are here for her." The frat boys howled, mimicking plane dives with their hands. Even Jason Cole, the flight attendant, let his jaw tighten into a half smirk as he muttered, "Ma'am, I'll have to report you for causing a disturbance." The mockery was louder now, desperate even, as though they needed their laughter to drown out the growing unease clawing at their chests. And then the roar came, a low guttural thunder that rattled the very walls of the cabin. Heads whipped toward the windows. Two gray silhouettes sliced through the clouds, sleek and predatory. F-22 Raptors. Their angular wings caught the sunlight as they pulled alongside the commercial jet, so close that rivets and markings were visible. Gasps filled the cabin. Phones shook as passengers fumbled to capture the sight. Kara's live stream comments spiraled into chaos. "Are those Raptors? This is insane. Fake, fake. No way this is real." Claudia's polished veneer cracked, her eyes wide. Ellen clutched Richard's arm so hard the bracelet cut into her wrist. Even Victor, ever the loudest voice in the room, fell into stunned silence. But not everyone was panicking. 3 rows back, Samuel Ward, an older man in a worn jacket, leaned forward. His hands trembled with age, but his eyes were sharp, veteran's eyes that missed nothing. He squinted at the Raptors, his breath catching. "Impossible," he whispered. The word carried just enough weight that those nearby turned to look at him. Samuel's gaze shifted to Alina, who sat with her eyes locked on the jets, her expression calm, almost reverent. His chest tightened. He had seen this before. The composure of someone who wasn't surprised by fighter jets, but familiar with them. The laughter faltered, rippling with uncertainty. The frat boys lowered their phones. Kara's voice wavered, trying to sound amused but edging into disbelief. "She's crazy, right? Just some random, right?" Alina didn't answer. Her hand rested steadily on her tote, her eyes never leaving the Raptors outside. The cabin was split now. Half clung to mockery, voices sharp with nervous energy. The other half shifted in their seats, the first threads of doubt creeping in. Fear exposes people. When the captain's announcement broke the illusion of safety, the passengers revealed who they truly were. Some grasped at money, power, and pride as shields. Lawsuits, status, reputation. Others sought comfort in distraction, live streams, jokes, denial. And yet, amid the chaos, one woman whispered with the calm certainty of someone who had seen storms before. "They're here for me." Her words unsettled them more than the raptors themselves. Because if they were true, then everything they thought about her, about appearances, about who mattered, was wrong. And Samuel Ward, with his veteran's eyes, saw it first. He recognized something familiar in her silence. Something earned, not imagined. The rest laughed louder to protect themselves from the possibility. But laughter has limits. And outside, the sky had already chosen its side. The chaos in the cabin clung like static. Phones raised, voices trembling between disbelief and denial, nervous laughter covering panic. But through it all, Alina Cross sat still, her gaze fixed on the two F-22 Raptors, pacing the aircraft like wolves circling prey. Her fingers moved slowly now, no longer restless but deliberate. She reached into her tote and pulled out a small object. Light from the cabin window struck its surface, catching the attention of the passenger across the aisle. It wasn't jewelry nor a trinket. It was a metal tag, simple and cold, its edges worn smooth by years of touch. Etched into it were 4 words and a number: Shadow Viper 22. The sight meant nothing to most. To some it looked like a dog tag, a keepsake from someone else's war. But to Samuel Ward, the old veteran whose eyes tracked her every movement, the breath hitched in his throat. He knew that call sign. He had heard it whispered in stories of missions that never made the news, tales of pilots who bent the sky itself to their will. And he had heard that Shadow Viper 22 had gone down 7 years ago, presumed killed in action. "My God," Samuel murmured, his voice shaking, barely audible over the hum of the engines. Alina didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She rose from her seat with measured calm, the metal tag glinting between her fingers. Jason Cole, the flight attendant, immediately stepped forward, hand raised like a barrier. "Ma'am, sit down. You can't be up right now." She met his eyes, her voice low, steady, cutting like a blade through cloth. "Report me if you like." Jason faltered. For the first time since the flight began, his authority felt paper thin. He stepped back, words dying on his lips. The passengers turned, cameras following her every step as she moved down the narrow aisle toward the front galley. Some still laughed, though it sounded forced now, strained at the edges. "What's she doing?" one whispered. "Crazy lady thinks she's in a movie," another muttered, but their voices lacked conviction. Alina reached the emergency radio panel, her hand hovering for a moment. Then, without theatrics, she pressed the button. "This is Shadow Viper 22C requesting acknowledgement." Her voice carried, not loud, not shouted, but resonant, calm, final. The cabin froze. The air seemed to vanish, replaced by the sound of blood rushing in ears. Even Kara's phone dropped slightly from her hand, her live stream forgotten. Outside, the Raptors responded. Both aircraft dipped their wings in unison, a sharp, deliberate salute that no one could misinterpret. Gas rippled through the cabin. Phones fell silent, mouths hung open. Victor Hale, who only moments earlier sneered about charity passengers, sat rigid, his jaw slack. Claudia Mercer's polished composure crumbled, her eyes darting between the jets and Alina. Ellen and Richard Drake clutched each other, disbelief written across faces, used to certainty. But Samuel Ward, he leaned back in his seat, tears pooling at the corners of his eyes. For him, it wasn't disbelief. It was recognition. The silence inside the plane was absolute now. A silence heavier than any insult, louder than any laughter. Alina let go of the radio switch, lowering her hand, the tag still nestled in her palm. She didn't look around for validation. She didn't seek their apologies or their awe. Her gaze returned to the window, to the sky that had never betrayed her. A single phrase: "This is Shadow Viper 22C requesting acknowledgement." Silenced the cabin. The same mouths that mocked her now sat frozen, too dry to speak. Truth, revealed at the right moment, doesn't land softly. It shatters illusions and leaves shame behind. The Raptors' salute was not just to a pilot, but to history and sacrifice. Samuel Ward saw it first. Greatness often hides in plain sight. Nothing about Alina Cross had changed. Still the woman in a faded hoodie and worn sneakers. Only their perspective shifted. Her call sign forced them to see what had been there all along. Silence as her shield, patience as her weapon, and one transmission strong enough to turn ridicule into fragile quiet. The silence that followed the salute of the Raptors was suffocating. Dozens of passengers sat frozen, their disbelief heavy in the recycled cabin air. No one dared move. No one dared laugh. The only sound was the hum of the engines, steady, oblivious to the storm unraveling inside. Then it came, the roar deeper and more commanding than anything before. A shadow swept across the windows, blotting out the sunlight for a breath. As the plane tilted slightly, passengers craned their necks, faces pressed against glass. Through the clouds emerged a shape so unmistakable that it pulled gasps straight from their lungs. Air Force One. Its blue and white fuselage gleamed like a monument in the sky, the seal of the United States catching the light. The massive aircraft moved with the grace of something that didn't need to prove itself. It wasn't just another jet. It was the very symbol of power, of nation, of command. And now here it was, escorting their flight. The cabin erupted, not with laughter this time, but with awe, panic, disbelief. Phones rose again, but hands trembled too much to hold them steady. Words tumbled out. "No way! That's impossible. Why would Air Force One be here?" The radio crackled, louder than before, as if the air itself was holding its breath to carry the message. "Shadow Viper, welcome back. We owe you everything." The voice was calm, reverent, and certain. It left no room for doubt. In seat 22C, Alina Cross closed her eyes briefly, as if acknowledging an old friend. She didn't smile. She didn't boast. She simply let the words hang in the air. Around her, the reactions unfolded like dominoes. Victor Hale, once the loudest mocker, sat dumbstruck, his jaw tight, his expensive watch forgotten on his wrist. His authority had always been built on wealth and posture, but now he looked like a boy caught in a lie too big to hide. Kara Summers gasped, her phone slipping from her hand, clattering against the floor. The screen was still lit, her live stream frozen on her stunned face. For once, the girl who lived to narrate had no words. Her audience had watched the arc from ridicule to revelation, and now they watched her silence. 3 rows back, Samuel Ward couldn't stop the tears. They welled freely, streaking down weathered cheeks as he whispered a prayer of gratitude he hadn't expected to say. To him, this wasn't a surprise. It was confirmation. He had felt it in her composure, seen it in her eyes. The look of someone who once carried the weight of men's lives in the sky. And now the nation itself had spoken her name again. Shadow Viper. Other passengers, once so quick to sneer, were caught in between awe and shame. Claudia Mercer clasped her hands together tightly, her earlier venom gone, replaced by a pale unease. Ellen and Richard Drake whispered nothing at all, their diamonds and silk suddenly weightless compared to the legend in gray cotton sitting just rows away. Even Jason Cole, the flight attendant, stood motionless, the edge in his posture crumbling as he looked at her with something dangerously close to respect. The silence that returned was different now. It wasn't mocking, nor was it comfortable. It was reverence, edged with guilt. Every passenger knew they had mocked someone who was not only more than them, but someone whose existence had once kept them safe without their knowing. Alina didn't bask in their realization. She didn't meet their eyes or wait for their apologies. She looked out the window at Air Force One, her hand still resting on the tag that had revealed everything. Her quietness wasn't emptiness. It was dignity. The weight of a forgotten legend is heavier than glory itself. Alina Cross had never changed. Faded hoodie, scuffed sneakers, tote bag in her lap. What changed was the recognition forced upon those who had mocked her. Legends often walk quietly among us, stripped of uniforms and medals, yet carrying histories larger than anyone can imagine. In that cabin, the truth landed like thunder. The woman they ridiculed was the very same who once flew under the call sign Shadow Viper 22, a guardian of skies now saluted by the most powerful aircraft in the world. And so the lesson was carved into silence. Greatness never needs permission to be seen. It only needs the right moment to be remembered. The wheels touched down at Reagan National Airport with a heavy thud, but the cabin was quieter than any landing the passengers had ever known. No applause, no chatter, no rush to stand up. Everyone sat still, as if rising too quickly would shatter the fragile silence they had been forced into. From the terminal windows, the scene was surreal. News vans crowded the tarmac, cameras already rolling, reporters speaking breathlessly into microphones. A wall of flashing lights awaited them. By the time the seatbelt sign dinged off, the world already knew. Air Force One had diverted in midair to escort a civilian flight because a forgotten legend was sitting in economy, seat 22C. The passenger's shame would not remain inside the cabin. It would be broadcast everywhere. Kara Summers discovered it first. She fumbled to pick up her phone, screen cracked from where it had hit the floor. Notifications poured in faster than she could read them. Her live stream had gone viral, but not in the way she dreamed. Clips of her mocking Alina, zooming in on her hoodie, calling her bargain bin vibes, were already trending. Sponsors pulled statements within hours. Her inbox flooded with outrage. By the next morning, Kara Summers was no longer an influencer, but a cautionary tale. Claudia Mercer tried to hold on to her composure as she exited the jet bridge, but her phone buzzed with a terse email. Her firm had reviewed the viral footage of her comments and decided her unprofessional conduct was incompatible with their image. In a single flight, her carefully cultivated reputation collapsed. No boardroom would save her from the echo of her own voice calling another human being it. For Jason Cole, the humiliation was quieter, but just as final. Airline officials moved quickly, issuing a bland statement about maintaining professionalism. Behind closed doors, the decision had already been made. Jason would be reassigned to ground duty, his name whispered in company circles as the attendant who sneered at a national hero. Every glare he had thrown at Alina, every dismissive word, now played on news loops across the country. The rest of the passengers didn't escape either. Ordinary travelers, businessmen, students, retirees, found themselves replayed in clips, laughing or whispering, their faces frozen forever in cruelty. Some deleted social media accounts, others issued apologies that rang hollow, but their reputations were not what mattered most. What haunted them was the memory. They had sat in the presence of greatness and chosen mockery instead of humility. That knowledge would not fade. Meanwhile, the outside world erupted. News anchors spoke her name with reverence. Alina Cross, call sign Shadow Viper 22, presumed killed 7 years ago, alive and quietly flying on a commercial jet. Old footage resurfaced of her aircraft in classified operations. Blurry images of missions whispered about but never confirmed. Veterans saluted their screens, strangers wept, and children listened to bedtime stories about the woman in the gray hoodie who reminded the world what dignity looked like. On the tarmac, reporters shouted questions as passengers disembarked, but the focus was not on them anymore. It was on the quiet figure who stepped last. Tote bag over her shoulder, head neither bowed nor raised in pride. She did not wave to the cameras. She did not speak. She simply walked into the waiting convoy as though stepping back into history. The lesson lingered for those left behind. For Victor Hale, who sat stone-faced as his wealth meant nothing. For Ellen and Richard Drake, whose diamonds had not shielded them from guilt. For Kara, Claudia, Jason, and every laughing face replayed online, the shame was permanent. And for the ordinary passengers, reflection cut deepest. They saw themselves in the cruel crowd, realized how quickly they had chosen ridicule over kindness. The arrogance they carried onto the flight dissolved into regret they would carry much longer. Because the woman in seat 22C had not asked for recognition. She had not demanded their respect. Yet by the time the wheels touched the ground, the world knew what they had failed to see. That true greatness needs no stage, and that dignity never wears designer clothing. The terminal was buzzing like a hornet's nest. Reporters crowded the glass walls, cameras flashing in a relentless storm. Every passenger felt the weight of the spectacle as they filed out. But at the center of it all, Alina Cross walked as if none of it touched her. Tote bag over her shoulder, hoodie still faded, sneakers still scuffed, unchanged, unshaken. Some passengers tried to speak, their apologies fumbling on dry lips. Others lowered their eyes, unwilling to meet hers. Alina gave them nothing in return. No anger, no comfort, just silence. The same silence that had shielded her all along. Near the edge of the crowd, a young mother stepped forward, clutching her child to her chest. Her voice trembled but carried, rising above the murmur of reporters. "Are you really Shadow Viper?" The question hung heavy. every ear strained to catch the answer. Alina paused, her gaze softening as she looked at the child's wide, unblinking eyes. She knelt slightly, her voice low and gentle, almost like a secret meant only for them. "I'm just Alina," she said, "but when the sky calls, I still answer." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward through the crowd. Some wept openly. Samuel Ward bowed his head, tears slipping down his cheeks again. The mother clutched her son closer, her shoulders shaking. The reporters surged forward, shouting for more, but Alina did not add another word. She straightened, adjusted the strap of her tote, and walked into the waiting convoy without looking back. The crowd remained still, as though frozen by the echo of her words. It was not the roar of engines or the salute of Air Force One that lingered most in their minds. It was that quiet truth. Alina Cross had proven nothing and everything all at once. She did not hand them her history, her scars, or her glory. She gave them only a glimpse, and even that was enough. True strength does not demand applause. It does not rise to meet ridicule with noise. It simply endures, patient and unwavering, until the right moment reveals it. The world would remember Shadow Viper 22. But those who sat in the cabin of that flight would remember something deeper. The woman in a gray hoodie who owed them nothing, yet reminded them that legends often walk beside us in silence. And when the sky calls, they answer. Not for recognition, not for praise, but because that is who they are. Stories like Alina Cross remind us of something America often forgets. Greatness doesn't always walk in uniforms or sit in first class. Sometimes it wears a faded hoodie, carries a worn tote, and slips quietly into the world without asking for recognition. In our modern culture, where appearance, wealth, and online attention often decide value, we too easily overlook the quiet ones, the steady ones, the ones who carry dignity instead of noise. Her silence was misread as weakness, yet it was her greatest strength. Isn't that a lesson for us all? In families, workplaces, communities, how often do we dismiss someone simply because they don't shine the way we expect? And how many legends, mentors, or protectors have we overlooked because of that? Now I ask you, what does Alina's story teach us about respect, humility, and judgment in today's America? Do you believe true strength can remain hidden until the right moment? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need the reminder. Legends live among us quietly.